Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show IT pioneer and co-founder of Okaya, Gregory Menvielle. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his childhood in France, the evolution of the internet, the pros and cons of social media, the global mental health crisis, using AI proactively in assessing mental health, forging performance, biomarkers and physical indicators, integrating wearables, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Gregory Menvielle. Enjoy. Well, Greg, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it, James.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
Well, this afternoon, I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Brilliant. So almost afternoon for you then. Let's start at the very beginning of your journey then. So based on your accent, I would imagine you're not a born and bred Texan. Tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Sure, absolutely. Well, yes, you and I are on the other side of the pond originally. I grew up in France, where I spent the first 17 years. And from the family dynamic, I was the only kid. Both my parents were physical therapists. My dad working in a hospital, my mom for herself. So I guess from an early age, I was used to seeing people helping others and bringing them back to their feet, literally, based on what they were doing. And both my parents were a lot into sports, so I grew up playing sports in France and attending a lot of games, especially rugby, of all things. And along the way, got the opportunity to see what was happening on this side here in the U.S. and did a few abroad stay. And the very cool part, my parents were nice enough or crazy enough, however way you want to describe it, to let me come and study here in the U.S. when I was 17. So I went to Santa Monica College and UCLA. I was playing water polo back then, so it was really it was heaven for that European kid who grew up in France in the 80s and 90s to be thrown in the U.S. university environment. That was brilliant. So you fell in love with the country, and eventually became a U.S. citizen. So along the way, started to work there and started my own companies roughly in around 2000. And every time the thread was, how can we use technology to make people's lives better? That was really the common thread. And as far as the big landmarks as we think about things throughout our lives, I'm sure many will relate. 2010, was very lucky to have my daughter arrive in my life, and been very happy to juggle the hats of a father and an entrepreneur at the same time. And sometimes also coach water polo still on the side, because that's a fun thing to do, to get back to the community and also to helping kids grow in a structured environment.
Whereabouts exactly in France did you grow up?
I grew up in Paris, so you can use all the cliche of the Parisian brat that you want. That's totally fine. It would be very true as well. And no, the interesting part, my mom is from the French Alps. My dad was from the Pyrenees, so I've always been used to being around mountains on a given basis, and always love the sea as a result. Spend way too much time in the mountains, I guess.
What sent them into the world of physical therapy?
Water polo right away as a reason, and I really loved it. Brought me a lot of fun and opportunities after that.
I didn't realize that water polo was as big in Europe, but when I came to the US, it was really a lot of the Navy SEALs and some of those people that I saw played water polo a lot. But I didn't realize there was a large element of that in the European side as well.
Yeah, it's not as big, but nowadays in France, it's not as big. Spain and Greece, they're the powerhouse. The UK is rising, especially on the women's side. So it's getting better, but it's nothing compared to, as you said, Southern California, especially that San Diego, Orange County area where they live and breathe with water polo.
Yeah, absolutely. What about career aspirations? When you were still in the school ages, what were you dreaming of becoming?
School age and studying. So I did my undergrad in econ and computer science at UCLA mostly, and that was a blast. Then after I graduated, it was late '90s, and I got to work for a um, pure internet focused consulting company named Viant, and that was in San Francisco, and that went on for a few years. It was great, got to learn a lot. Everything you heard about the badness of the late '90s in San Francisco in around startups is true. We've seen a lot of it. But going back to study, the part that got pretty neat is that I had the opportunity to go back to school. So I went to the University of Chicago and I studied, of all things, I did a master's in Egyptology because I wanted to keep and study econ. And I wanted to study the ancient world, and the best avenue back then was to do a program at what's called the Near Eastern Language and Civilization School, which pretty much is hieroglyphics and working with the raw material.
That's a really interesting perspective. I talk a lot about the lessons in history. I mean, not to mention the fact that we go to war over and over again. And as a species, we just don't learn. But let's move that aside. The
Yeah.
the wisdom as far as ancient medicine, and I would argue, physical therapy is really kind of in that world there, using holistic methods to heal us, whether it's plant medicines, whether it's movement, chiropractic, acupuncture. What about from the econ side? Are there lessons woven into ancient civilizations that we need to be leaning back into at the moment?
Yeah, there are a few things. First, let me go back to the point you were making about medicine, because something very interesting. It's called the Edwin Smith Papyrus. And it was very much the first compendium of medical conditions that the Egyptian had identified. And when you go and look at those documents, you could see that those guys already had an understanding of things like cholesterol nowadays. Of course, they didn't know what it was because they didn't have the same tools, but they had an understanding of what it was doing to arteries and how to potentially treat it. So, history is keeps on repeating itself, unfortunately, for many things. On the econ side, especially I was studying international trade, and the less trade barriers you have, usually the better it is for commerce in general and for everybody. That's something that has been shown throughout history, not just the Egyptian, but then. Sorry, I'm a history buff. Don't worry, we'll get back to the to the
No,
firefighting side at some
we
point.
got
But
all the time in the world.
yeah, I know. But if you start to jump into more like the Italian Renaissance and the Venetians, then trade is what really made the world go round. Especially because from the standpoint of when you trade, people are going along with the trade, so you discover new cultures, new way of thinking, and there's a mix that happens that's highly valuable. So those were the main two things that I go back. Now, as a fun aside, where um, after they taught us the language, of course, we had to have tests and exams. And sometimes you would translate text, and it's not like the big inscription you see on the monuments, but like piece of stones. And the best comparison I could give it would be like reading an email. Like literally, there are pieces that remain where the guy say writing to his wife, "Hey, I have to stay in the city longer to sell the crop. Make sure you take care of the farm. I hope the kids are doing well. And by the way, watch out for my brother-in-law, for the brother-in-law, because he can't plow the field properly. It's literally discussions that we're having, just in a different format nowadays. So it was really neat, big eye opener. And even some of the way the language is structured is very much structured the way computer language is done nowadays. So tons of things to learn from the past.
You just made me think of something that, never even occurred to me before. When we talk about trade, in the old form, it was literally getting on a ship and going to another culture, bringing your products, taking another product back. There are good examples, obviously, like, the spices of India, and there's bad examples like slavery.
Yep.
But you had to interact with those other people. You had to understand their customs. You maybe even learn the language. And so there was a real relationship there. Now, fast forward to the stock exchange in New York, or this virtual world that we live in, you've completely lost that. Do you think that this technology, on one hand, has become detrimental to the relationships required to create trades in their original form?
Yeah, I mean, every time you lose the connection between two parties, that's usually when problems start to happen, because then you just become a series of lines in an email that can become some issue. And that's true with trade, that's true with sales, that's true with everybody. I mean, it's something we see when we deal with firefighters. It's always better to deal with them face to face than over email. I think where the biggest issue that I see nowadays, especially when you look into some of the automated trading, is that you don't even need the human in the middle anymore to get the efficiency in the market. In the old days, so to speak, what was interesting is that you could also learn things as you go along. So, you talk about the spice trade, which was like huge. But as people were going through the spice trade, if you think about it, that also opened their eyes to different construction techniques, different ways to store material, different ways to do things that they could bring back. So people would bring back a lot more than just the spices along. There was a huge amount of corpus of knowledge that they could bring to potentially help one location.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can never remember the exact quote, but I think it was Mark Twain said something to paraphrase: the enemy of prejudice is travel. And,
Yep,
now when you actually
absolutely.
go to another place, not only are you seeing the people and you're interacting with them and you're understanding, again, the shared humanity, but also the innovation. And I love that quote: the rising tide lifts all ships. If you go to Norway and see how they do the prison system, and Portugal's decriminalization of drugs, and Finland's school system, and the way Japan views food, the whole
Yeah,
world could learn from that. But if we're boiled down to a digital age, people aren't immersing themselves in these cultures anymore and having these aha moments of, we should bring this back to America or England or France.
yeah, absolutely. And then there are also some geographical advantages. Again, knowing where you grew up and where I grew up. If you think about it, you drive what, 4 hours from Paris, or maybe 5 or 6 hours from London. You can be in such a variety of culture, but also in ways of doing things. And someone from the Netherlands is going to have very little in common with someone from a different area, but you can learn different ways of doing things. In other parts of the world, you drive 5 hours, you're still in the same state, and that also plays a big role.
Absolutely. You got into the internet world very early.
Yeah.
Before we progress into how you're using technology today, which is very exciting, back then, what were the directions that you thought the internet was going to take that didn't manifest? And then what were the things that surprised you now looking back of where you thought it was going to go 20 years ago?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when I got to UCLA, I think it was in 93, 94 that I started UCLA. We literally had some of the first connection and first accounts. I'm old enough for yes listeners. You guys can put me in the dinosaur group. That's fine. But I still remember the dial-up modem and being mesmerized when screen was scrolling at the time. But um, back then, I think you could see how information exchange was not going to be the same anymore. Where I was a bit interested is that in France in the late 90s, we had something called the Minitel, which for all intents and purposes was the internet. It was like small boxes hooked up to the phone, and you could already go and and book your train tickets online. You could find some information, do some directories, and you could argue that France missed the boat on the internet because of the Minitel, but I think it also brought me into that view of what is going to be the first usage of the internet in the US. Obviously, the boom in how people marketed themselves and branded themselves became big. What I was not seeing as much at first, up until I started to work for that consulting company, is once you're in the middle of a change, you don't see how much people on the outside are not caught up with the change. And there were a lot of the fears that were about the internet back then. Those are the same fears that you have about AI right now. And I think the companies that did well were the companies that were supposed to alleviate the fears while still forging ahead and bringing new innovation.
Now, fast forwarding to the conversation now, we're going to get into some beautiful applications of AI.
Yeah.
What are the fears, like actually well-founded fears of AI if used poorly? And then where do you hope on a positive side AI takes us?
Well, I think we're recording this a few days after Anthropic got shut down by DoD because they did not want to remove the guardrails. I think when we talk about AI in general, we need to take a little step back away from the everything that we hear from the media standpoint and everything. At the core of what AI is at the moment is just an engine that is able to ingest a ton of documents and then make statistical guesses as to what the answer should be when you talk about a large language model. So literally, based on what you feed it, you can start to say, "Hey, give me your best idea on how to deal with this problem or that problem." That part, that capacity to do this for me is incredible. Regardless of what your job is, regardless of what your interests are, that idea that you can access that amount of knowledge and get some decision and insights, that's a huge positive opportunity. Now, if you don't put the guardrails in and say, bring me back any crazy idea, or do not worry about the consequences on my neighbor for the idea you're going to bring me, that's when you fall on the other side of the spectrum. That's where you're no longer helping, but you're creating a lot more issues than you were intending at first.
I saw it was a post, a quote, but it was something to the effect of AI can help me write and paint so I have more time to do the dishes and sweep the floor. He said, but what I want AI to do is to help me sweep the floor and clean the dishes so I have more time to write and paint. And I thought that was beautiful because I had someone, when I wrote my most recent book, tell me, one of my guests say, well, you can just get AI to write it. And I'm just like, I can't think of anything worse than getting AI to write a book of this thing that's burning in my heart, of all these experiences and these people that we lost and these changes we want to make. But what an amazing opportunity for it to do the things that really human beings shouldn't be doing anyway, automate that,
Yeah.
and, turn back time as far as our humanity and our creativity.
Yeah, and AI again is the sexy marketing word as well for in one case stats. When you look at cars or robots, they still call it AI, but it's a different type of automation. And in the field of firefighting, I'm sure everyone would agree, especially their loved ones, that we'd much rather send a robot into a blazing building to do the work rather than send a human being that may not make it out of the building. So there are definitely some good use, and the way at least we're looking at AI, I'm looking at AI and trying to also get my daughter to understand with AI. It's like if you use it as an assistant, as a companion to augment what you want to do, it becomes a tremendous ally. But when you let it make the decisions for you, when you take that agency away from yourself or from other people, that's when you cue in every single bad movie we grew up with on things attacking us, and that's where we may end up.
I worked for Universal Studios for 22 years, and the beginning of that, I did the Terminator 2 stunt show. So I was brought up, on stage with these drones flying around and chasing Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then here we are now in 2026 watching military videos of exactly that. So it's kind of ironic that I look at AI the way that we're talking about, the right way, and I use it for creating videos. I just did a promo for the television adaptation of my book, and I used AI to
Yeah.
create a trailer. Amazing. I used it to edit the,
Yeah.
the show. But like you said, it's a tool, it's an adjunct. But to then insert that into the creativity, or like you said, take off the guardrails where now it can send off all these weapons to do whatever and no one's overseeing it. Now we're in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So we do have a responsibility in this
Yeah.
time, day and time to same as the people that made social media, were realizing when it got away from them the damage that it was doing on some respects. I think it's a very important conversation. So it remains a tool that allows us to do more human things.
Oh, absolutely. And I what you'll see as we have this discussion today, I'm definitely not on the alarmist side of things, but at times they're very practical. You just mentioned when you were at the studios, the drone were flying around. Those drones were piloted by humans in the back, which is the way pretty much every single drone, at least on the US side, are being flown, regardless of civilian or not. And I'm sure you had a level of comfort because you knew the operators and you knew they were not going to run that drone into you or do their utmost for it to not happen. If that drone was fully automated, like some of the DJI that can follow you when you run, just so it looks cool, the number of things that could go wrong, and I'm not even talking about attacking someone. No, just things that can go wrong that you need to have built into the system and be able to react. That's not trivial. And the last thing you want is pretty like a drone hitting you as you're doing your stunt to jump in a water tank. So that's where I think there's still a lot of work to do in that field.
Yeah. Yeah. I know even with the automated cars and some of these things, like my laptop freezes sometimes, my cell phone freezes sometimes. So, if we can't get the most trivial technology that's in our homes to be super reliable, I don't know if it's time to trust the computer world to be completely autonomous quite yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you alluded to, what we're doing now. Well, excuse me, what you're doing now and helping my community. Walk me through the journey to Okaya, and then let's start talking about, what the original concept even was.
Sure. So the very short of the story, and we can dive into it more, is that when you use Okaya, we have a technology platform that helps people understand their state of mental fatigue, readiness, and they can then use that information in different ways. But the why, which is always what's important to why do people get into those things. Again, as we go through life, whether it's personal or people around us, we see people who struggle with mental wellness, or being too tired, all those things. And in my case, in the case of some of my co-founders as well, we've lost people, just like I think almost anyone in the fire service has lost people along the way. And there are a few things that always came up that were very frustrating when you like to help others. It's always that idea of, I wish I had known sooner. I wish they had spoken up. I wish there had been signs. And that's frustrating to hear when it's a problem that's repeating again and again and again. And so that was really the nexus of us wanting to do something in general to help. Now, that infamous aha moment, even though it's a very interesting term, at some point I was doing quite a bit of work as part of the Intel Software Innovator Program. And back then, Intel was really awesome. They would give us a lot of hardware 2 or 3 years before the hardware we make it to commercial. And one day they gave us those very specialized cameras that now have made their way into cell phones and a bunch of other applications. And on the camera box, it said, "Hey, it can pick up your heart rate." And my reaction was like, absolutely no way that this thing can work. uh, you know, so I did what I tend to do, which was get on my indoor bike, had my heart rate monitor on, and lo and behold, that thing was picking my heartbeat within 2 or 3 beats of my Garmin sensor. And it was that moment where you're like, voice and voice analysis is there. computer vision is trying to see things that us as human we can't. And that's say, why don't we try to build something that's as simple as an MRI or a blood check to understand your state of mental well-being? Because in the end, the sooner you can understand that you're starting to trend a certain direction, the sooner you can address it. And we started to work on this. Along the way, we started to do some work with the U.S. Air Force, with whom we're also still doing some projects, because their biggest issue is we want to make sure our people are ready because we don't want to lose them. And right now, a lot of the decision making that a pilot is going to make or someone who does maintenance is self-reported. Just like any pilots in the world or in your field, most firefighters, most operation, you're self-reporting whether you can do the job or not, and that leads to many, many, many issues. And we started working with them, and now we have something stable, working with a few squadrons, and we're starting to work within fire departments. That's very exciting because the application is the same, but people's approach and people's perception are a bit different as well, and that's very exciting to see how we can help this group.
How was the camera able to pick up the heartbeat?
Oh, all right. So this one baffled me for a while. I have no problem admitting to it.
Me
But
too.
yeah. So pretty much there are two ways that they do it. On newer models, because now I think there are even some apps where you can see this, the cameras are smart enough or sharp enough to pick up the change in coloration in the blood flow in the veins. So as they see the flow in the veins, you can start to figure out the timing of the heartbeats in there. That's the way it's currently being done. And a lot of those cameras as well, they just don't have the video feed, but they also have an infrared feed. So for example, anyone who, when you open your iPhone or you open certain other things, it's not just the basic video as you and I see it. They also have another cloud feed being shown on the face to measure different facial landmarks.
That's incredible. I'm going to do a tangent, then we'll get back to the other metrics that you guys are using. But just while I remember, I want to see if this is a myth or if this really is true. Everyone's reports that they'll have a conversation about something, not a Google, not anything like that. The phone just happens to be in the room. And then all of a sudden, the social media adverts are full of the thing that they were just talking about. Are these phones listening?
Some, yes. And I wish I could give you guys a list. I'm sure I would be the most popular guest on the podcast if I could give you the list of the ones to look for or not. But no, really, the way you have to think about it is, and that's something actually most people can do from being educated about the problem. Different ambient technologies work differently. So that's why, sometimes you have to say the keywords. I'm going to use Alexa because I don't have one here, so we don't have to worry about it. So the phone is always on listening for that keyword where you say Alexa. When you say Alexa, it is supposed to just trigger the full listening part where the information is then being sent to the servers. There are different ambient technologies that are much more on a always on listening system. So looking at how it works behind the scene is always an important one. Now, if you're totally into paranoid mode, you can look at the web traffic on your phone or on your router, and you will see what gets sent. But the simplest way as well is really to look at how the trigger are being sent.
Okay, good to know. All right, well, let's talk about vagal tone, voice. I had Jim Poole on a couple of times, the CEO of Newcom, and amazing downregulation software. But recently they've woven in a stress test now, and he was talking on here that the vagal tone or the voice can show the vagal tone and therefore your stress level. So what are you guys finding as far as the voice as an analytical tool for your product?
The voice is a great analytic tool. There's no doubt about it. You can and also in what we do. So pretty much when you're an end user, we'll talk about the admin, the station side of things later. But as an end user, you come and do your check-in. The video kicks in, you interact with the AI, and you have like a short 2-3 minute conversation with the AI. The platform will remember previous conversation as well, so it's not like a boring set of things. What gets very interesting is that the voice will change from one event to the other. The voice will change based on what you're talking about as well. So your voice says a lot. And where it gets even more bewildering is that once you start to put the video side in things, at times you can get perfect alignment between what the person says and how they're expressing it. And at times you can get quite a difference in patterns between what they say and how they say it. And that's really that nuanced information that becomes very valuable.
And what about the face itself?
Oh, the face speaks a lot. That's the joke of, hey, Greg, you have a long face today. What's a long face and things like this. Or facial expressions or facial traits also can show a lot when it comes to, especially to tiredness. I think when people don't sleep as much, it shows a lot. That's one of the given example. But you can also see a lot when it comes to eye blinks, and that's where cameras are much better than humans at picking those things up. And in the end, by the time our analysis is done between voice and face, we will have looked at over 60 biomarkers, and all those biomarkers can really tell a story about who you are and where you're at a given point in time.
Where I see a huge amount of value of this technology is you take a station of firefighters who are all working the same shifts. They are all in the meat grinder together. So when they look at
Yeah.
each other, they're like, well, how are you doing? I'm good. I'm fine. I just had an interaction with a friend of mine who's still in the fire service, working a huge amount of, not just his regular hours, which are 56 plus hours a week, but then overtime as well, and a father of
Wow.
a new child. And I asked him, how are you doing? I asked it because he looked awful. He looked exhausted. And he's like, I'm good. I'm good. So this is just it. In his world, he probably seems he's fine. But now I'm out the fire service and I have a well rested eyes. I can see the disconnect between the words he's speaking and how he's actually coming across to me, in the real world.
Yeah, and what we're seeing, especially in any sort of high performance group, pilots, first responders, we'll also see this in top athletes. We're pretty much trained and conditioned to always be ready to go. And you won't be ready to go because that's the way you were told that group has to be, but also because there's an entire team that's relying on us doing a part of that job for the team. So I think there's always that fear of answering anything else other than I'm fine, because you may be worrying about some of the consequences of it, which is too bad because that's really where problems happen. But that's part of the culture that we've all seen at this level.
So you all have, people that you've lost. You want to make a difference in this mental health space. What was the landscape that you were seeing at the time? And what were some of the problems that you were trying to solve with your new technology?
So I think when you start at the time, you try to focus on the end problem. Can we help people? So the number of suicide, for example, drops. But when you start doing all this, you really look at the last few hours in the chain. And the more you work with professionals, and the more you realize that the real value for everybody is to be as high up in the chain as possible. Meaning, can you start to help people with simple things just when they start to drop? And that's really the first step. You mentioned your friend was like 56 hours and the kids and everything, and ideally when they're very early on and we start to see things drop, let's call him Joe. Don't know his name, but say, Joe, look, at you're starting to trend down, and it's always when you talk about X or when you reflect upon Y that you start to drop a little bit more. Here are some resources provided by your department that can help you. That ability to tell people, you know what, I hear you, I see you, it's not going to be used against you. Here's what you can do to get better. That's really a big step. So that's really the core of where we started. Now, when we do work with the administrative side of things, the challenge there, they know their teams are not doing well. The challenge is how can we improve it, and then how can we justify the budgets to improve it. So there's a big administrative side of things that kicks in to help leadership, to help decision makers deploy those systems at scale.
We talked a few days ago, before when we set this up. I'm 9.5 years deep into this podcast now, so that's been a perpetual learning for me. I'm constantly evolving. 10 years ago, we were like, "Wait, this is a real thing," and then we were all saying, "Oh, we have PTSD," and then there's moral injury, and then there's sleep deprivation, and it just slowly unpacks itself. But what I want to do now is reframe the way that we look at physical and mental health in the first responder professions away from crisis, we're dying of all these things, which is a real thing, and into performance. Because the
Yeah.
tools that you would use to forge a high level of performance, and I'll give a perfect example because we're sitting here on this particular date about 3 days ago. I think it's Longwood. Forgive me if you're from that place, but a Texas special operations team rescued the crew from a hot air balloon 900 feet up a antenna, telecom antenna. The level of fitness and professionalism and training that team had to have to facilitate that rescue is exactly what I'm talking about. That's how we should be viewing our profession physically, mentally, level of training. And so reframing the mental health side from, as you said, let's try and stop them dying, to, well, let's forge performance. Because if we're forging performance, now we're talking about appropriate rest and recovery and quality of sleep and reducing stress and fitness standards and understanding nutrition and hydration and relationships and good leadership, just like you would for an NHL team or a Olympic water polo team. So talk to me about that shift. You're initially trying to solve the suicide problem. When was it that you started realizing that actually getting way ahead of it and focusing on the ability to perform at a high level, when that ended up becoming the focus?
Yeah, it's pretty much the shift happened right when we started to work with the Air Force, and because Air Force and pilots have one thing that they use a lot that I wish was more present in the fire industry. For example, they have simulators, which means they can really put you in situations where you will lose no matter what, but how you are doing at a given point in time will have an impact on how long it takes for you to lose, and sometimes you can get the proper reactions out of it. Here's what I mean by this. Let's put, you know, mental wellness and readiness to the side. If tomorrow I walk into, I'm part of a crew, and I walk into the station, and let's not even talk about a broken leg, something as simple as a sprained ankle. You could have the reaction say, "Hey, Greg, just suck it up, get in your gear. We need to go on the call." You're right. However, my ankle is still sprained. We get there, we need to go up the ladder, and I'm supposed to be right behind you to assist you. If I have a sprained ankle, I'm not going to be keeping up with you. That's physically impossible. There is going to be a delay. That delay, that break, that drop in performance, that's where you may end up being in a hospital with high burn for like 3 weeks. And I think everyone can realize this from the physical part, because it's easy to see someone who's got a physical problem. Someone who is barely staying awake because they did not sleep enough or did not have enough recovery time. Someone who is not in proper state of mind because their kid is having some very serious medical conditions or any other issues. You're not going to see that, but it's still going to be on a ladder behind you. The risk is exactly the same. And when we think about performance, that's what I love from the when we talk about the Air Force guys and aviation as well. They're really looking at it of the act of flying is such a small part of operation. If the person who does the planning is not up to par, something bad's going to happen. Maintenance crew, they do not do a bolt the right way, something bad is going to happen. Your weapons officer not having a good day, you're in trouble. So it's really that team part, and that's where the key is from the performance standpoint. Let's put aside for a moment, hey, James is looking horrible today. He's tired, and suck it up, James. As to crap, what's going to happen when I need to rely on James at a very brief interval? What's going to be the consequence? That's where the performance happens. And if you start to look at it this way, I think many chiefs can also reframe how they consider other options, because in the end, it's mission driven. We're out there saving lives. We're out there helping people. All these little problems that people have from the fire side, bringing it in, you don't perform as well on the mission standpoint, and it reflects on everybody, on the city, on your department, on yourself. So I wish people took the same sport-like approach to deal with the issue.
This is what happens when you reframe it. I'll give a scenario, and this is a normal scenario. A fire crew wakes up at 3 a.m, and they had a call at 1. They got to sleep for 30 minutes, and now the tones have gone off again. Slide down in one of my stations, a 3-story fire pole, down, get in the back of the tiller truck, drive lights and sirens to a house fire. Get off the truck, throw a ladder, like you said, throw on your gear, and then climb and now make an entry to a 2nd-story window. Now search for a child in the pitch black, high stress, low sleep. Now let's say you find that child. Now you have to bring the child back down. And there's a delay because a train has blocked off the ambulance. So now you're having to take off your gear and now work a cardiac arrest on a 3-year-old. That is an incredibly advanced scenario for any other profession, have all those different skill sets back to back to back. And yet this is the profession where, like I said, work 56 hours and then mandatory overtime, 80, 90, 100 hours. And so because we keep doing it, people are like, well, we got to have people in the seats. Versus if you asked yourself, what would you need to forge a high level of performance so you can drive that $1 million truck through the town without killing anyone? You can see that child in that blacked out room in your mind in a flow state. You can remember the medications that you got to give during that cardiac arrest. And so when you reframe it with performance, all of a sudden that sleep is imperative. Those fitness standards are imperative. The mental health side is imperative. And so this is what I love about, what you guys are doing, is you're really asking that crew, are you ready for that call? Are you ready to climb 900 feet to an aerial tower, or the Orlando Eye, like our Orange County rope rescue teams? Are you ready to take that boat and look for that person who's supposedly drowning in the lake next to you? I mean, these are any other profession, like you said, the military or trucking or shipping or aviation, they won't let you go if you're not ready. But my profession, they turn their head and it's got worse and worse and worse. So the ability to really look at this crew or your whole department and say, how are we really doing? And really see that chasm between performance and, arguably decay. Hopefully this will be a turning point for people to realize how far we've fallen and how far we've got to go in a good way, in a positive way, to go back to forging these elite tactical athletes that are able to make these life and death decisions at a drop of a hat.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty spot on. And one thing that from the start we were pretty clear on, we're not therapists. We don't do diagnostic and treatment, and there are many other reasons why people may need help that go beyond therapy. But think of it like a fitness assessment, but for your mental readiness, where you do the physical every year, you train it every year, and that's what keeps you going, and in many cases keeps you alive. So there's really no difference here. Like, can we put you in a position to be ready when performance matters the most? And in your example that you gave of that call, there are many departments where you're going to have 2 or 3 calls arriving almost at the same time. Could there be a world where, rather than knowing it's crew A, crew B, crew C, then no matter what's going to A, B, C calls, that you can do dynamic assignments based on how people are doing? Because in the end, again, the idea is to get that 3-year-old kid out of the building and in one shape so they can be returned alive to their parents as soon as possible. The idea is not, is crew A going to go and answer the call? it's the end result that matters, and we need to focus in on more from the performance standpoint.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the first responder themselves. Let's say it's a firefighter. What does the application look for that individual, and then we'll go macro as far as the battalion and the
Sure.
department.
Yeah, it's very simple. Any sort of browser that you have, whether it's your desktop computer or a phone or an iPhone, you come to the site and you do a check-in. During the check-in, again, the AI is going to be talking to you for a few minutes, remembering your previous conversation. At the end of that conversation, the outcome is a score. The neat part is that the score is only a reflection on you. So, you and I could both be at a 75 today, but the reasons why we would both be at a 75 are very different. So there's no need to compare. And by when you do this, then you start to have a mirror about how you're doing as a person and how you're progressing. You can also have a way to understand what your stressors or drivers can be. For example, you may be feeling totally fine and ready to go, to take the expression of your friend, and then the platform will come back and say, "Hey, wait a minute, Joe. You're saying that you're fine, but all your biomarkers are really showing a high level of fatigue. How do you feel about this?" Just to get people to understand and to mentalize things better. So that's really the core part of the application. Obviously, if people get into more at-risk ideation speeches, we do have processes in place to alert them and give them some options. But it's really to help people realize where they are and get a few simple things they can do in the moment to improve their situation.
Well, we're a very competitive population as well. So, I know just in myself, like if there's something that tells me, okay, 100 is a perfect score, then I'm going to do whatever I can to try and be 99 or whatever it is and go to the station the next day. Where are you at? Oh, you're only 76. I'm 81. What are you doing? Well, I've decided to turn off the TV an hour before I go to bed. Oh, okay, I'm going to start doing that. So I can see how when you're getting that input, it will actually educate us on what is working, what isn't working. Are we even doing okay in the first place? How far have we got to go? So then you've got that interaction. And I think this is, I was speaking to Josh Clementi a while ago. This is the exciting thing about AI. When it comes
Yeah.
to a counselor, when it comes to a physician, they all have a place, but I think we've lost the autonomy on our own physical and mental health. And when you put that power back into the palm of someone's hand where they can look at their blood work and say, okay, well, this is, my cholesterol's a little high and, my sugar's a little high. Okay, well, let me adjust the way that I eat. I don't need to go to a physician and get prescription meds for that. I can take care of
Yeah.
that myself. And the same with this. If I'm seeming like I'm okay, but my score is repeatedly a 66 or a 60, then what is it that I'm missing? And I realized, well, I'm, having 2 beers every night. Maybe if I just taper off that for a bit, my quality of sleep will go up. And now lo and behold, I'm in the 80s. So I like the fact that it puts power back in the individual to start self-experimenting and working on improving their own scores too.
Yeah, and when obviously on the platform you own your own data, you decide with whom you share it, so it's very private to begin with, and that's also the idea of bringing the agency back. We had an example not long ago where actually when we studied some tests with the problem when someone in a program got a score that was much lower than what he expected, and he's also in a very high performance group. So he had two very interesting reactions. The first reaction was like, "My score is low, therefore the software is crap." But because they were doing an eval, he had to talk to the equivalent of a peer support, and the peer support said, "Okay, well, do me a favor, maybe go and talk to the base counselor because we would like to have that, to return that feedback." And very cool thing happened. He went to the base counselor, realized there was a reason why the score was low. But then as he started to voluntarily work with that counselor, he could see the score go up. And, that's, to me, that's the power of what we're doing. It's not about telling you, "Hey, James, you're doing horrible today. Suck it up." It's really to get you to the point of here's what we're seeing. And because you're a critical thinker, because you're into performance, here are some of the behaviors we are seeing about you. Do you want to improve it or not? And then that it really becomes your decision and the impact on it.
I mentioned Newcom before. I think this is a beautiful example for you to look at that, go, okay, it's lower than I want. All right, well then, go take a 20, 30-minute Newcom session, find it somewhere comfortable, put on a sleep mask, do this. This is equivalent of about 90 minutes of sleep. It down regulates your nervous system. Go walk around the station, get some daylight, and drink some water,
Yeah.
and then see where you are again. Because I mean, these are all actionable things, and we know that there's a way of upregulating or downregulating, and sometimes it's just that, and sometimes it might even be like, you know what? I mean, if you're not doing well, do you want to take half a day off, and we'll get someone to cover
Yeah.
for you today? And therefore, let's say you're driving again $1 million piece of apparatus. You don't have a horrible wreck and kill people in an intersection because you're barely awake. So there's all these different applications from the, like you said, forging that elite performance through to avoiding a disaster. So I think just having the ability to test your own cognition and see how you're feeling, and does that match up with what it says that you're doing, um, especially as it learns you better, as the AI starts getting deeper and deeper. I'm sure there's a lot of trust then. You're like, okay, I thought I was doing all right,
Yeah.
but I'm usually an 80 on this and I'm a 60 today. What am I missing? Do I need to just, go out of service for 30 minutes, do a new calm session, and then, jump back in again? So I think there's so much power in understanding that there's a deficit or a disconnect between how we perceive we're feeling and how we're actually doing as far as, fit for duty.
Yeah. And, sometimes you have that external eye, that mirror reflecting on you and say, here's what we're seeing. Uh, do what you want out of it. I think for a lot of people, especially in the fire department, you know a lot of the tools that people can use to improve themselves quickly for a few minutes to be able to do a task properly. I mean, if you get to a car crash and the victim is not doing well from just the trauma of having been in a crash, I've seen in firefighters, you know how to talk to these people. I mean, you don't get to someone who just got out of some sort of crash and, come on, suck it up, Greg, you're fine. Just take the bus, go home. No, you are trained to help others. And really the idea is you have those tools already. At times it's just a reminder of, hey, use those tools with yourself so you can be even a better version of yourself, for your spouse, for your team, for everybody. Most of the time, it's if you take things early enough, you will be able to go a long way very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, what about the macro level? So zooming out now, someone who's in a leadership position that's overseeing the whole department.
Yeah. So for them, we do a few things, because if you think about it, for leadership, it's a very tough equation they have to solve. I don't think there's a single leader that I've run into so far at any department that has not had to bury someone from their team or from their teammates. So they're very, very aware of the issue. The challenge they have is at some point it becomes to dollars and cents. And how do you translate that into your budget, into operational decisions, into staffing decisions? And we're spending a lot of time helping them really in doing the math of readiness. Understanding that when their teams improve their readiness, there's a drop in overtime that's needed. It's a drop in absenteeism. It's a drop in the small accidents that you talked about. You're so tired, you back up that $1 million truck into a wall because you were too tired to do it. And that's a tough balance. So to do this, what we do when we use the platform is that we give you aggregated data about a shift or your crews based on the size of the station are doing and the organizational topics they're talking about. So you can start to think of it as almost like as a game where here's a situation, which tools are you going to deploy to improve the situation? So it becomes very dynamic, and that's where we can bring like results very, very quickly for those guys.
One of the key topics that I talk all about is the firefighter work week. And the example I give is the barista in Starbucks is working 40 hours a week. The firefighter that just did the scenario that I talked about with the child is working 56, and now we have a recruitment crisis because arguably we
Yeah.
haven't fixed our working conditions, and now they're working 80. I would assume in the hands of someone with some humility that if they then start using the product and across the board everyone seems to be below par, that then it would also be a great insight into maybe the need for a change of environment. A fourth shift
Yeah.
is usually what it is. So, and on a macro level, if people are constantly seeming to be, tired, underprepared as far as, like you said, cognition, physicality, that if you're seeing it, one or two people, okay, well then what's going on with their lives or in that station, or did they just have, poor luck with the number of calls they had? But if you're looking at it across the board, then maybe there's a systemic problem that then needs to be addressed.
You're spot on, and we're part of the Esri startup program, and the person who leads the fire initiative within Esri is a former chief in Virginia, and he and I were talking about the other day, and he had that great line. I'm just going to read it to make sure I don't butcher it, but it's really the future for firefighters. It's that ability to integrate human readiness into the systems that guide operation, preparedness, and resilience. And it's exactly what you described, where right now we're looking at every single little bit of firefighting in silos. And because we're looking at things in silos, we're missing a lot. And that's one of the big shifts that are going to need to happen, if anything, because as you describe it, the shortage is getting worse and worse. And at some point, something is going to have to give.
Well, with the financial conversation as well, this is what's interesting, and it really blows my mind, because you would think that someone in a financial position, that being their job title, would be looking at the downstream wastage of money through people that you train that leave 1, 2, 3 years later, that the overtime that you're filling at time and a half, not to mention the human cost of that, but that doesn't show up on a budget sheet. The lawsuits from tired firefighters making mistakes, the medical disabilities, the workman's comps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the false economy of doing it the same way has taken us to where we are now. But when people say, oh, we don't have the money, as you alluded to, a lot of these, fitness programs, your technology, the healthier work week, there's really reallocation of funds. Let's go invest it in the people, at the front end, and you will actually save money hand over fist down the road. But you've got to obviously invest in that change initially. But the savings that people will have, 5, 10, 15 years later, will actually allow you to then, invest in even more things, gyms and stations and mental health programs and, all these other areas. So like I said, the false economy is the term of how we got here, and it's having that courage to realize that the way we've done it isn't working. Let's take that money from downstream. Let's put it into a fourth shift, Okaya, fitness standards, et cetera, et cetera. And now you've become a force multiplier, not just of stopping the crisis, but actually forging performance.
Oh, spot on. And, I know we have a firefighter friend in common, Mary Ballack, out of Florida.
Yes.
And I was talking with her one day, and she said something which I did not think of, but makes a lot of sense. When you think about the early peer support group, they started, and it was the same group of peer support who were trying to help each other. And then we all got older, and our needs for what peer support should be was moving with us getting older. Kids coming to the picture, relationship issues coming to the picture, moving around. And the peer at times had the tendency of losing track of those new people coming in. And you get into a program where, because you have the disconnect between the incoming classes, which are also used to consuming technology differently, have very different interaction with their peers than they did just 10 years ago. That's where that communication and knowledge gap is going to lead exactly to what you said: bad budget allocation, bad long-term everything. And when we work with those guys, that's where we really look at the platform where helping a chief or a leader who, let's face it, most of the time they're very disconnected from operations, especially as soon as you have 2, 3, 4 stations, it's hard to keep track of how everyone is doing, let alone in the volunteer world. It's giving them the tools to be able to understand where their teams are at to make those budget decisions that you described. Because really, maybe for 6 months, you don't need to spend on, I don't know, on psychology services, but for 6 months, you need to double down on physical therapy services or whichever group. But to have that real time understanding, it's going to help stretch your budget. It's going to make you much more attractive as well as a department when people look and consider where to go and work.
Yeah. And I think this is another hidden cost or hidden saving, excuse me, that I've talked to a lot of people that have been in the profession. I got in just over 20 years ago now. There's people obviously that have been way longer than me. When we were testing for the fire service, it was incredibly competitive. And they were only taking the top, in one of my departments, 1%, but a lot of places, 10%, 15, 20%. So, the chances of you having a well-prepared, fit, passionate firefighter are a lot higher. Now, as this has gone down and down and down, the chances of you hiring the wrong person that maybe is injury prone, that just simply doesn't have the heart for the job, becomes a lot higher. And then there's a financial cost attached to that too. So by fixing the things that are a problem, by using the lens of performance and technology like yours, now, as we've seen in departments in Florida that have made this progressive change, now they're back to hundreds of people testing for a handful of jobs again. So even that, from a budget saving point of view, you're getting better prepared candidates in the first place, and then you're coupling it with this performance lens. I don't want to find another word for performance, but your performance is, at a much higher level now, and then your longevity and your wellness is tied into that too. So you're saving on, multiple different elements.
Oh, and you're spot on. And this reminds me, I've had conversation with people on both sides. Matthew Thorpe, who was one of the leader at the Fire Academy on the East Coast, and Tyler Capron, who's actually one of our stakeholders because we do a lot of pilots with Boulder Fire. And what they're seeing as well, because you have that shortage, exactly the way you describe it, you have more people going to the academy, but you may not get people who are really the right fit for the job. However, the reality is that it takes them 3 or 4 years potentially to realize they're not the right fit. So you're going to be investing a lot for that period of time. And in the end, you're back to square one and you have to go through. I think it was Tyler who was mentioning $175,000 to $100,000 per firefighter when you need to replace them. That's a huge amount in the budget. That's a huge budget line item to deal with. And if you could improve that, as horrible as it is to always bring it back to dollars and cents, it makes a lot of smart sense there.
Absolutely. No, it is. I think this is what maddens me is the solutions are out there, and even the financial savings are proven. It's just, deconstructing the myths that we've told ourselves, putting in the tools that we know work, and then trusting it, and like I said, some of the departments in Florida are now talking about the money they're saved and the sick time that's been cut and the retention that they've got. And like I said, the high level of recruitment, interest that they have now, the number of candidates. So yeah, I mean, this is where we were like 20 years ago. We had so many people vying to be a firefighter, and we can get back there. And I would argue the candidates were even better because, as I've said, now these young people understand strength and conditioning. They understand accessory work and injury prevention and mindfulness and breath work and, all these other elements. So your good candidates are probably better than we were, 20 plus years ago, because they've got more tools. So leaning into that group of incredible men and women, it's exciting what the future of the fire service looks like.
And now you turn it this way, it actually brings a good point. What's the reason why those people have the right tools? If you think about it, if you're into fitness, you can go on YouTube and you'll have all the videos in the world to give you info on how to become a better, power lifter or whatever you want. So you're talking about the generation that has grown up being used to being on those platforms to know how to improve themselves. And something, I'm part of the Fire Service Psychology Association, and they just had their meeting down in Houston a few months ago. And I remember going to a station. It was interesting because one of the older firefighter was saying, it's weird. Back then, in between calls, everyone would be at the table talking and sharing information. Nowadays, people are spread around on their phone, oftentimes of consuming information. So I love your point about saying they're better trained because they have been able to understand how to use those tools that are at their disposal to become better people. And the more departments that make that mind shift of the workforce has changed, the better it becomes to then bring the tools to make everyone better, and as a result, everyone safer.
Yeah, and then going to that dining room table, which is very important, as one of my guests, Dina Ali, talked about. The goal is to not have peer support anymore. That you just have a cohesive environment where you sit down at a firehouse table and everyone talks the way we should be talking to each other, and therefore they're
Yeah,
able to offload whether it's their relationship problems or a call that they just had. But then you use the technology, like you said. If I want to learn how to truly do an Olympic snatch, I can look on YouTube and find the world's best people coaching it now. 20, 30
yes,
years ago, you had some QVC guy in spandex telling you that his workout routine was the latest and greatest. And more often than not, he was lying to us all and had surgery. That's how he actually got slim. So
yeah,
now we have the real, experts at the end of our, fingertips. We have access to these AI technologies like yours. So then we can also then sit around the dining room table, put some, as you said, some kind of uh, God, what was the term you used? And the safeguards, anyway, of our electronic use, so that we can also lean into that human interaction. And we create this conversation of performance, which includes all the mental health tools. All of a sudden, there's not as much stigma around this conversation, and you're not weak anymore. You're trying to work
yeah.
on your performance. So it completely reframes it.
And that weak part always smile when I hear it because we talked about the suck it apart and the extreme. But look, if you look at any high level activity, any high level sports, what do all these athletes talk about as to being the best in their field? Their mental game. It's it's what makes the difference between you know average, good, great. That's all they talk about. And we have the tendency of thinking of, oh, it's a they problem, not an us problem, but it's very much the case there.
Absolutely. Well, you've mentioned a couple of departments. Talk to me about some of the agencies that are using your platform.
Yeah. So Boulder Fire is really the one with whom we do the most pilots and get a lot of data back and information. We are not just token, so to use it, a Fire Academy on to do those things, and we have been able to get a lot of firefighters, especially on the East Coast, under the leadership of Pete Burke, who's very much into technology, to give us feedback on the admin side of things. And we're getting a lot of usage and feedback from them.
And what about on the military side?
Military side, so we are deployed at a few squadrons where they use that in evaluation mode and in what they call semi-operational mode. So it complements their systems that have in place. What is interesting in the military side, and something we haven't talked about, is that the reason they're deploying us that right now, if you're a pilot, and by the way, not just military, aviation as well, sorry to scare everybody right now, but you're internally self-reporting your fitness to fly. And you have a score between 0 and 3. And the way it works is, imagine you're around a group of 5 or 6 people and said, okay, so here's what we're going to be flying today. How many points do you want to report on your, you know, they call this human factor level between 0 and 3. 0 is great, 3 is bad. And what drives every leader crazy is that in like 20 years, they've never seen someone report more than a 2, even after coming back from like night ops and nonstop flying back and forth across the globe. But what they found, and which for us was the big lesson learned, and where the tool really makes a difference, during those briefing, you always have the leader say, "Hey, I have an open door policy. You can come and talk to me anytime there's an issue you want to bring up." And I've heard this in a few briefing, and I go to this leader and say, "Hey, off the record, how often does that happen?" And they're telling me like something, "Greg, 20 years, maybe 5 times, 10 at most." And that's the point, I think, to go back, that you were making around leadership and understanding those generational shifts. Look, I would encourage any fire chief right now, or any peer support, to log into Reddit and to go into the firefighting thread on Reddit. And you will see what the generational gap likely is, what people talk about, what they worry about, and why they do not report things to you the way you think they're reporting it. And it's that gap that creates all the problems in the world.
And that's what I like about this. It's not your perception. Because, like I said, my perception of how tired I am 48 hours into a shift when everyone else has been there with me, as I'm looking at them and I'm awake. This guy's asleep with his face in his coffee cup, so I'm doing better than him. But then you go on the app, and all of a sudden it's like, "James, you're a 46. You're an absolute mess." So maybe you shouldn't
Yeah.
even drive home yet. Maybe you should go back in the bunk room after you've been relieved, take a, like I said, a new calm session or a 90-minute nap, and then
Yeah.
drive home. Because that's a big, the big thing about this. And if you talk to a lot of people in the sleep medicine world, the cadres of special operations selection are known to drive off the side of cliffs on their way home, because they're
Yeah.
trying to sleep deprive the recruits, but they themselves are sleep deprived too. And it's the same with us. When we're driving home after 24, 48, 72 hours, I've had it where I don't even know how I got home before. Literally, they're taking the micro sleeps all the way up. And that's so dangerous. And it's irresponsible, really, for us
Yeah.
to be on the road like that.
Yes. I mean, I heard the story like a gazillion time. And what I find even more interesting in your guys' field of work is that usually when accidents happen, you're the ones who come and help people who had those micro sleep moments. So you really see the consequences of it if you think about it. And but that, I think it speaks a lot as well to that need of sometimes just having that external, totally unbiased system that tells you, "Hey, James, you know what? Your family loves you, your spouse loves you. Take your 20 minutes nap, then get to them in one piece. It's much more important than getting back right now."
Absolutely. Well, we talked about the kind of firefighter, then we talked more at the chief level. Are there any other areas you want to talk about as far as the application?
Yeah, it's the way we look really at the platform is the way you talked about earlier. You have all these different parties, and at some point, a therapist comes into the picture as well. For example, we're working with a group in Minnesota who do a lot of support for firefighters. We also have other therapists who are very much embedded within that fire service community. And the way we can help them is really twofold. The first one is, as long as you as a firefighter want to share your data with a trusted, therapist, for example, or coach, you can share that data. And we're finding that not having to repeat yourself all the time about a problem goes a long way. But also, where there's a benefit is that, at some point people need help. Um, and unfortunately, as firefighters, you don't have access to the most effective help all the time. So you mentioned that story of not knowing how you got home, which I heard a lot. The other story that I heard a lot as well is, "Hey, I had a very impactful call that I went to kind of debrief about. I went to our EAP provided therapist, and then they ended up in tears, and I had to console them. And in the end, I helped the therapist, and no one helped me. And I will never go back to those EAP certified therapists." So that connection as well, that closing the loop, closing the gap, goes a long way, because you can't just tell someone they're not doing well. You need to be able to help them take the next step.
I've heard those, what I call EAP Russian roulette stories, so many times. That occasionally someone is matched with the right one, or their EAP
Yeah.
is actually deliberately chosen where everyone on that list is culturally competent. But I've heard that universally, across the whole country numerous times. And it breaks my heart, because these are the people that are still here despite that example. that experience. But how many people will never be able to tell that story because their one last I need help reach out moment was to the wrong counselor through an EAP, and they were like, all right, I am broken. The counselor was in tears, and then they end up taking their own life. So this is something that we know needs to be fixed. And, again, using technology like yours to see how you're doing, and then having the access to hopefully the right kind of counselor if you do kind of red flag on your app. This is another really important thing, because that whole, if you're struggling, reach out, call me, here's a number on the pin board. We don't want them to get to the point they're struggling, because at that point they're not calling anyone. They believe that they are the reason for everyone's pain, and they're just looking for a place to finally end it. So seeing that
Yeah.
trending, as we say in medicine, of someone seeming to be doing well, and then like every time they come on shift, they're a little bit lower. You really have an opportunity again to get ahead of this way before it becomes critical.
Yeah, and to go back to a point you were making earlier, James, the idea of you're the financial guy, you're the number guy. In most departments that we talk to, when they hit like 5% of utilization on their EAP, they're ecstatic, which means that they're still spending a lot of money on things that are not being used. Why aren't they being used? And that's also where I think the platform that we have, and I'm sure other people do similar things, there's a lot of value when, if I present a recommendation to you via the platform, say, hey, James, have you considered going to therapist A? And if your answer is no, because we're having a conversation, is then to ask you, why haven't you been there? Because sometimes it may not be that that person is not good, but it could be that that person lives too far, or it does not match with your schedule, or. But unless you have that understanding from a leadership standpoint, you're operating blind. And it would be like, hey, you know what? We're not going to check the SCBA today, and we're going to send people out. There's not a single chief that would say yes to that kind of madness. But the way we're doing the whole support around the human being, that's pretty much what we're doing.
Absolutely. Well, for people listening then, where can they learn more about Okaya? Where can they try it out, do a test, etc.?
Sure. So there are a few ways. Obviously, okaya.me is the main landing point. We will be at FDIC on the Esri stand. So please come and say hi. Tell us you heard about the podcast. I'm sure James will want to hear about this as well. So we can pass the information along. And we have different programs where people can pilot our technology with a small group, which is what we recommend in general to begin with. And they can start to use the tool. Because, if at the end, if you know more about your truck and the state of your truck than you do about your team, then we definitely can help you and should be helping you.
Absolutely. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you go. The
Sure.
first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Two of them. And yes, I know I'm taking a bailout answer. I'll say two of them. One is actually a paper/work from a lady named Carrie Ludy. She's in West Virginia. She's part of FSPA. And she has written a lot around the concept of dehumanization of the firefighter. And that idea of, because we look at you as, or because those with the environment of superheroes, of the consequence of framing people as superheroes, especially when they retire. Fascinating stuff, highly recommended. So that's one. And the second book that I pretty much recommend to everybody is Shoe Dog, from the founder of Nike, because it's one of those books where you keep on reading it and you think you're just going to hear about the failure of a company, and then it says, and that's when I decided to start Nike. And actually, no, it's the up and down of building a business, building an operation, doing the right way to humans, making mistakes along the way. Love this book.
Brilliant. I'm going to have to get it. I've had that recommended a few times, so sounds amazing.
Yeah.
All right. What about films, documentary, or television? Any of those that you love?
Oh God! Well, you're talking to the kid who grew up with Indiana Jones and went to do Egyptology, so it's hard not to mention this one. No, there's one. Okay, there's one that I will put the blame squarely on my daughter, named "Murder in the Building." And what I really like in besides the story is really their ability of storytelling, but also the magic that happens when you bring a great cast together. And that often makes me think of, when I coach or when you put teams together, there's a dynamic you need to have as a team. And those guys every season know to bring the supporting actors and the actors to work together and really elevate the product that average actors would not see. But again, having been in the studios in Hollywood, you know how this thing worked better than I ever will. So
Yeah, well, I did the live show, so I did the stunt shows in the theme parks. I didn't do
yeah,
much in Hollywood, but yeah, that was sort of Steve Martin, Martin Short, and who's the singer? I forget her name.
Selena
The
Gomez.
Gomez.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, yeah. I've watched a few of those. They were really good. All right. Well, the next question is: there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Again, I think there are two trends in all the work that I'm doing. And I think that also relates to all the people that I've listened to in your podcast. It falls into the category of people who've lived the ugly part of firefighting and want to improve. And in that case, Alan Moody is one person I'll be more than happy to put you in touch with. He When he did his presentation at the Fire Service Psychology Association, I think all of us were borderline in tears and went to give him a hug, not just for his story, but how it then impacted and made him follow a certain path. That's one. And the second part I'm always fascinated with is the concept of team dynamics. How do you get your team to perform in the middle of challenges? And one guy is Adam Krikorian, who's the head coach of the women's water polo team. And the reason I'm thinking about Adam is that in during the Olympic Games in Paris, they didn't get the outcome they wanted, but literally they had people close to them, close to the team, dying or close to or being in a very bad shape right around the games, and how it impacting team dynamics and how he had to manage around this. He did an incredible job.
Brilliant. They both sound amazing. So thank you for the suggestions.
Of
All
course.
right. Well, then the last question before we just kind of reiterate where people can find Okaya and yourself. What do you do to decompress?
I like to run. Um, Whether I like it or not, I have a hyperactive golden that I need to take care of when I'm not traveling, and spending time with my kid. It's also a big one because you get to see a new generation, a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things, and it's good to have that shift at times in your mind.
Absolutely. And you said it was okaya.me. If people want to
Yes.
learn more about you, where are the other places online to reach out to you?
The best way to reach out is via LinkedIn. I'm at Gregory Menvielle on LinkedIn, and you can follow my Instagram if you'd like, but it's mostly going to be pictures of airplanes and and cool places where I get to coach some of the water polo teams that I'm helping.
Did the fascination with airplanes come from the work that you do now, or was it there before?
No, I always loved to fly. I was very lucky that my parents, being the only kid, always dragged me around in all their travels. So I flew very early on, and that ability to be in that medium was great. And one thing I wish I had more time and means to do would be to learn to fly instruments and do all this fun stuff. It's great up there.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. Like I said, what excites me about this is it's already a product that's in the world of performance now. We're talking about where we need to be in the fire service. And as I've alluded to recently, if everyone's holding a rope and at the front end, you've got the high performers and on the back end, you've got the people in crises. If you do the same things that we know work, everyone's still moving in the same direction with the rope. So you're pulling the people on the back end out of their dark place And then if you keep moving forward, obviously you're getting into the world of high performance now. So I think it's, great conversation, but also an incredible product that I think the fire service really needs. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, James.